The moving truck pulled up to the small house on Miller Street on a gray morning in October. The neighborhood was quiet. A few curtains moved in the windows across the street as neighbors peeked out to see who was arriving. Inside the truck were boxes, old furniture, and the belongings of a family that had just lost everything they knew. 12-year-old Eli stepped out of the car and looked around. The town was nothing like the city he had grown up in. There were no tall buildings here, no busy streets, no friends waiting for him on the corner, just silence and the smell of rain that was about to fall. His mother came up behind him and put a hand on his shoulder. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. They both knew this move wasn't a choice. It was survival. His father had lost his job 3 months ago, and after that everything fell apart. The apartment they loved, the school Eli had attended since kindergarten, the life they had built, all of it slipped away like sand through their fingers. Now they were here, starting over in a town where nobody knew their name. Eli helped carry boxes into the house. The place was small and smelled like dust and old wood. His room was barely big enough for a bed and a dresser. The walls were bare and cracked in some places. He sat on the floor that night and looked up at the ceiling, wondering how his life had changed so quickly. School started 2 days later. Eli's mother walked him to the front door that first morning. She fixed his collar and smiled at him, but he could see the worry in her eyes. She told him to be brave. She told him to be himself. She told him everything would be okay. He wanted to believe her. The moment he stepped inside, he felt eyes on him. Kids in the hallway turned to look. Some whispered to each other. A few laughed quietly. Eli kept his head down and walked to his first class. He found a seat at the back of the room. The teacher introduced him to the class as the new student. She asked him to stand and say a few words about himself. Eli's heart dropped. He stood up slowly. His legs felt weak. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come out right. He had a stutter. It had been with him since he was little. Most of the time he could manage it. But when he was nervous, when all eyes were on him, it got worse. My name is Eli, he said. I'm F from the city. A boy near the front made a face and mimicked him under his breath. A few kids snickered. Eli felt his face go red. He sat back down quickly, wishing he could disappear. That was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the teasing only got worse. Kids started calling him Mumbles. They would ask him questions just to watch him struggle to answer. They laughed when he raised his hand in class. Some of them made fun of his clothes too. His family didn't have much money, so most of what he wore came from thrift stores. The other kids noticed. They always noticed. Eli started eating lunch alone. He found a bench near the back of the school behind the gym where nobody really went. He would sit there with his sandwich and his thoughts, watching the clouds move across the sky. Sometimes he wondered if things would ever get better. Sometimes he wasn't sure. At home, he didn't talk much about what was happening. His parents had enough to worry about. His father was out every day looking for work. His mother picked up extra shifts at a grocery store on the other side of town. They came home tired and stressed. Eli didn't want to add to their problems, so he kept it inside. But there was one thing that kept him going. Every night after his parents went to bed, Eli would close his door and sit by his window. He would put in his earphones and listen to music. And then, very quietly, he would sing. When he sang, something amazing happened. His stutter disappeared. The words flowed out of him smooth and clear, like water from a stream. His voice was strong and full of emotion. It surprised even him sometimes. How could the same voice that stumbled over simple sentences suddenly become so powerful when it hit a melody? This was his secret. No one knew about it, not his parents, not anyone at school, just him. He had loved singing for as long as he could remember. His grandmother had been the first to notice it. She used to take care of him when he was little while his parents worked. She would sit him on her lap and hum old songs, and Eli would hum along. One day, she heard him singing by himself in the backyard. He was maybe 5 or 6 years old. She came outside with tears in her eyes and told him something he never forgot. "You have a gift," she said. "Don't ever let anyone take it from you." She passed away 2 years ago. It was the hardest thing Eli had ever been through. She was the one person who always believed in him, the one person who saw something special in him when no one else did. After she was gone, he kept singing. It was his way of staying connected to her. Every note felt like a conversation with her spirit. But he never sang in front of anyone else. The thought of it terrified him. What if his stutter came back? What if people laughed at him like they did in class? What if he opened his mouth and nothing came out? These fears kept his gift hidden. He was too afraid to share it with the world. So he sang alone, night after night in the quiet of his small room while the rest of the house slept. At school, the days blurred together. The teasing continued. The loneliness deepened. Eli became invisible. He walked through the hallways like a ghost, unnoticed by most, mocked by others. He learned to keep his eyes down. He learned to stay out of the way. He learned to make himself small. But inside, something still burned, a tiny flame that refused to go out. It was the memory of his grandmother's words. It was the feeling he got when he sang. It was the hope buried deep that one day things might be different. He didn't know when that day would come. He didn't know how it would happen. All he knew was that he couldn't give up. Not yet. Because somewhere inside that shy, stuttering boy with the second-hand clothes and the lonely lunches, there was a voice waiting to be heard. A voice that could move people. A voice that could change everything. He just needed the courage to let it out. And that moment, though he didn't know it yet, was closer than he thought. 2 months passed. Winter came early that year, covering the small town in a blanket of white snow. The trees stood bare and the wind bit hard against the skin. Eli walked to school every morning with his hands stuffed deep in his jacket pockets, his breath forming little clouds in the cold air. Things hadn't changed much. He still sat alone at lunch. He still kept his head down in class. The nickname Mumbles had stuck, and he heard it whispered behind his back almost every day. But somewhere along the way he had learned to live with it, not because it stopped hurting. It still did, but because he had no other choice. His father had finally found work at a warehouse on the edge of town. It didn't pay much, but it was something. His mother still worked long hours at the grocery store. They were slowly getting back on their feet. Eli could see the relief in their faces, even though they were always tired. He didn't want to trouble them with his problems at school, so he carried them alone. One afternoon in early December, something happened that would change everything. Eli was walking through the main hallway when he noticed a crowd of students gathered around the bulletin board near the front office. People were talking excitedly, pushing forward to get a better look. Curious, Eli made his way closer. He wasn't the type to get involved in anything at school, but something about the energy in the air pulled him in. When he finally got close enough to see, his heart skipped a beat. There was a bright yellow poster pinned to the board. In big bold letters it read, "Spring Talent Show, sign up now." Below the title there was more information. The talent show would take place in March. Students could perform anything, singing, dancing, playing an instrument, comedy, magic, whatever they wanted. A panel of teachers would judge the performances. And here was the part that made Eli's stomach flip. The winner would get the chance to perform at the town's summer festival. It was a huge event that happened every year in July. Thousands of people came from all over the county. There was a big outdoor stage in the middle of the park, and every year one student from the school got to perform there. It was a big deal, a really big deal. Eli stood frozen in front of that poster. Around him, students were laughing and joking about who would sign up. Some were already making plans with their friends. A group of girls talked about doing a dance routine. A boy with a guitar said he was definitely going to enter. Everyone seemed so confident, so sure of themselves. And then there was Eli, standing in the back, saying nothing. But inside his mind, a storm was building. He thought about all those nights in his room, all those songs he had sung to himself by the window. He thought about his grandmother and the way her eyes would light up when she heard him sing. He thought about her words. "You have a gift. Don't ever let anyone take it from you." What if this was his chance? The thought scared him more than anything. His hands started to sweat just thinking about it. Him, on a stage, in front of the whole school. He could barely speak a full sentence without stumbling. How could he possibly stand up there and sing? But another voice inside him pushed back, a quieter voice, a braver voice. What if he could do it? What if just once he let people hear what he could really do? What if he stopped hiding? The bell rang. Students scattered to their classes, but Eli didn't move. He just stood there staring at the poster, his heart beating hard in his chest. He thought about it all day. In every class, his mind drifted back to that yellow poster. He couldn't focus on anything else. By the time school ended, he had made a decision. He was going to sign up. The next morning, Eli arrived at school early. The hallways were mostly empty. His footsteps echoed on the tile floor as he walked toward the bulletin board. The sheet was pinned right next to the poster. A few names were already written on it. Eli stood there for a long moment, just staring at the blank line waiting for him. His hand trembled as he pulled a pen from his bag. "Just write it," he told himself. "Just write your name." He pressed the pen to the paper. His handwriting was shaky, but he did it. He wrote his name on that list, and for a second he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. But that feeling didn't last. Later that day, during lunch, a group of boys walked past his bench behind the gym. They were laughing about something. One of them, a tall kid with messy hair who always seemed to lead the teasing, stopped when he saw Eli. "Hey, Mumbles," he said loudly. "Heard you signed up for the talent show." Eli's stomach dropped. He didn't respond. He just sat there clutching his sandwich, hoping they would leave. But they didn't. "What are you gonna do?" another boy asked with a smirk. "Try to TT talk on stage." They all burst out laughing. The tall kid clapped his hands and shook his head like it was the funniest thing he had ever heard. "This is gonna be good," he said. "I can't wait to see Mumbles make a fool of himself in front of everyone." They walked away still laughing, leaving Eli alone on the bench. His eyes burned. His chest felt tight. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to run to that sheet and erase his name before anyone else saw it. But he didn't. He sat there staring at the ground, letting the shame wash over him. And when it finally passed, something else remained. Something harder, something stubborn. He wasn't going to quit. Not because he wasn't scared. He was terrified, but because if he gave up now, he would be giving them exactly what they wanted. He would be proving them right. He would be Mumbles forever. And he couldn't live with that. That night, Eli sat by his window like he always did. The moon was bright and full, casting silver light across his room. He put in his earphones and pressed play on his favorite song. It was an old soul song, one his grandmother used to sing to him. The melody was slow and beautiful and filled with emotion. He closed his eyes and began to sing. His voice filled the small room. It was rich and warm and full of feeling. Every note carried the weight of everything he had been through. The loss, the loneliness, the fear, but also the hope, the tiny flame that still burned inside him. He sang like no one was listening, because no one was. But soon that would change. Soon the whole school would hear him, and nothing would ever be the same again. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know how hard the road ahead would be. All he knew was that he had taken the first step. He had written his name on that list, and there was no turning back now. The boy who had been mocked, ignored, and laughed at was about to do something no one expected. He was about to fight back, not with his fists, not with words, but with his voice. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of Eli's life. Word had spread fast. Everyone at school knew that the quiet kid with the stutter had signed up for the talent show, and almost everyone thought it was a joke. Some kids laughed about it openly in the hallways. Others whispered when he walked past. A few even came up to him and asked if he was serious, their voices dripping with disbelief. Eli tried to ignore it. He kept his head down and focused on getting through each day. But it wasn't easy. The weight of all those stares and whispers pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. Some days it felt hard to breathe. One morning, he found a note taped to his locker. It was written in messy handwriting on a torn piece of notebook paper. The words cut deep. Do everyone a favor and drop out. Nobody wants to hear you stutter on stage. He stood there staring at it for a long moment. His hands shook as he pulled the note off and crumpled it in his fist. He wanted to scream. He wanted to cry. But he did neither. He just shoved the paper into his pocket and walked to class like nothing had happened. That night, alone in his room, he finally let the tears fall. He sat on the edge of his bed and asked himself the question that had been circling in his mind for days. Why was he doing this? Why was he putting himself through all of this? He could just quit. He could erase his name from that list and go back to being invisible. At least then, people would leave him alone. But every time he thought about quitting, he heard his grandmother's voice, soft and warm, like a gentle hand on his shoulder. You have a gift. Don't ever let anyone take it from you. He wiped his eyes and took a deep breath. He wasn't going to quit, not yet. But the days kept getting harder. In class, teachers started giving him looks. Not mean looks, but something worse, pity. They had heard the rumors. They had seen the sheet. And they, like everyone else, didn't believe he could do it. One teacher even pulled him aside after class and gently suggested that maybe he should reconsider. She said it in a kind voice like she was trying to protect him, but her words stung just the same. I just don't want you to get hurt, she said. Sometimes it's better to wait until you're ready. Eli nodded and thanked her, but inside her words echoed painfully. Even the adults didn't believe in him. At home, things were tense. His parents were still working long hours. His father came home exhausted every night, barely able to stay awake through dinner. His mother juggled her shifts at the store with taking care of the house. They didn't have time to notice how quiet Eli had become, or maybe they did notice but didn't know what to say. Eli practiced every night. He would wait until the house was silent, then close his door and sing softly by the window. He had picked his song weeks ago. It was the same old soul song his grandmother used to hum, the one that made him feel close to her, the one that made his heart ache and soar at the same time. But even as he practiced, doubt crept in. What if they were all right? What if he really couldn't do this? What if he walked out on that stage and froze? What if his stutter came back and he couldn't get a single word out? What if the whole school laughed at him and he became an even bigger joke than before? These thoughts haunted him every night. They followed him to school every morning. They sat with him at lunch on his lonely bench behind the gym. No matter how hard he tried to push them away, they always came back. One evening, about 2 weeks before the talent show, everything almost fell apart. Eli was in his room trying to practice, but his voice wouldn't cooperate. He kept starting the song and stopping. The notes felt flat. The words felt hollow. Nothing sounded right. Frustration built up inside him until he couldn't take it anymore. He threw his earphones across the room and buried his face in his hands. He was done. He couldn't do this. He wasn't strong enough. That's when the door opened. His mother stood in the doorway. She had a tired look on her face, but her eyes were soft with concern. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked over and sat down beside him on the bed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she asked him a simple question. What's going on, sweetheart? And just like that, the dam broke. Eli told her everything. The bullying, the nickname, the note on his locker, the teacher who told him to quit, the kids who laughed at him every day, the fear that kept him awake at night. He told her about the talent show, about signing up, about how scared he was, about how he didn't know if he could go through with it. His mother listened without interrupting. She held his hand and let him speak until there was nothing left to say. When he finally finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and gently lifted his chin so he was looking at her. "Do you remember what Grandma used to say about you?" she asked. Eli nodded. Of course he remembered. "She saw something in you," his mother said. "Something special, and I see it too. I've heard you sing, Eli, late at night when you think no one is listening. I stand outside your door sometimes and I listen, and every time it takes my breath away." Eli's eyes widened. He had no idea she knew. "You have a gift," she continued. "A real gift, and I know you're scared. I know those kids have been cruel to you, but you can't let them win. You can't let their words decide who you are." She squeezed his hand. "You signed up for that talent show because something inside you told you it was time. Something brave, something true. Don't let fear take that away from you." Eli felt tears running down his cheeks again, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of something else, something lighter. His mother pulled him into a hug and held him close. She smelled like home, like safety, like love. "You sing for Grandma," she whispered. "You sing for yourself, and no matter what happens on that stage, I will be so proud of you." They stayed like that for a long time, and when she finally let go, Eli felt different. The doubt was still there. The fear hadn't disappeared, but now there was something stronger sitting beside them. Belief. Not from the kids at school, not from the teachers, but from the two people who mattered most. His mother, who had listened and understood, and his grandmother, whose voice still echoed in his heart. He picked up his earphones from the floor, he put them back in, he pressed play. And he started to sing again. This time his voice didn't waver. This time the notes rang clear and true. This time he sang like he meant it. The talent show was 2 weeks away, and Eli was going to be ready. No matter what anyone said, no matter how scared he was. He was going to walk onto that stage. He was going to open his mouth. And he was going to show them all who he really was. The night of the talent show arrived faster than Eli expected. He stood in front of his bedroom mirror, wearing the nicest clothes he owned. A simple white button-up shirt and dark pants. His mother had ironed them that morning, pressing out every wrinkle with extra care. His father had polished his old dress shoes until they shined. They weren't new or fancy, but they were clean. And tonight, that was enough. Eli stared at his reflection. His heart was already pounding, and he hadn't even left the house yet. In just a few hours, he would be standing on a stage in front of the entire school. The thought made his stomach twist into knots. His mother appeared in the doorway. She smiled at him, her eyes glistening with pride. "You look so handsome," she said softly. Eli tried to smile back, but his nerves were too strong. She walked over and straightened his collar, even though it didn't need straightening. It was just her way of being close to him. "Remember what I told you," she said. "You sing for Grandma, you sing for yourself. Everything else will take care of itself." He nodded. He didn't trust his voice to speak without shaking. His father came in next. He was a man of few words, especially after the long days at the warehouse. But tonight, he placed a firm hand on Eli's shoulder and looked him straight in the eyes. "We're proud of you, son," he said, "no matter what happens tonight." Those words meant more to Eli than his father would ever know. The drive to the school felt like it took forever and no time at all. Eli sat in the back seat, watching the streetlights pass by in a blur. His hands were cold and clammy. He kept wiping them on his pants, but it didn't help. When they pulled into the parking lot, he saw the crowd. Cars everywhere. Families walking toward the entrance. Kids from school laughing and talking in groups. The auditorium lights glowed warm through the windows. This was really happening. Eli's parents walked him to the side entrance where the performers were supposed to check in. His mother hugged him tight and whispered, "I love you" in his ear. His father gave him a nod and a small smile. Then they went to find their seats, and Eli was alone. Backstage was chaos. Students rushed around in costumes and makeup. A group of dancers stretched in the corner. A boy tuned his guitar nervously. Two girls practiced their comedy routine, giggling between lines. Everyone seemed so prepared, so confident. Eli found a quiet spot near the back and sat down on a folding chair. He closed his eyes and tried to breathe. His heart was beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. One by one, the acts were called to the stage. The dancers went first. Eli could hear the music thumping through the walls and the audience clapping along. Then came a magic act. Then a boy playing piano. Each performance brought more applause, more cheers. The crowd was alive and excited. And with every act that finished, Eli's turn got closer. He started to feel dizzy. His mouth went dry. He thought about all the times kids had laughed at him, all the times they called him Mumbles, all the whispers and the jokes and the cruel note on his locker. What if they were right? What if he walked out there and couldn't do it? What if his voice failed him when he needed it most? His hands were trembling now. He gripped the edges of his chair just to keep them still. Then a voice called his name. "You're up next." Eli's heart nearly stopped. He stood up slowly, his legs feeling like they were made of water. He walked toward the side of the stage where the curtain blocked the view of the audience. He could hear them out there, hundreds of people talking, laughing, waiting. He peeked through a tiny gap in the curtain. The auditorium was packed. Every seat was filled. Teachers sat in the front rows. Parents filled the middle and back. And scattered throughout were the faces of his classmates, the same kids who had mocked him for months. He saw the tall boy with the messy hair sitting near the front with his friends. They were whispering to each other and grinning. Eli knew exactly what they were waiting for. They wanted to see him fail. They wanted to watch him stumble and stutter and fall apart in front of everyone. For a split second, he wanted to run. Every part of him screamed to turn around, walk out the back door, and never look back. But then he thought of his grandmother. He thought of her sitting on the porch with him when he was small. He thought of her voice, soft and full of love, telling him he had a gift. He thought of the promise he made to himself after she died, that one day he would sing for the world. This was that day. The host announced his name. The audience gave a polite, scattered applause. A few snickers rose from somewhere in the crowd. Eli stepped out onto the stage. The spotlight hit him like a wave of heat. It was blinding. He couldn't see the faces anymore, just shadows and shapes beyond the light. His legs carried him to the center of the stage, where a single microphone stood waiting. He gripped the microphone stand to steady himself. His hands were still shaking. The auditorium grew quiet, too quiet. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the room pressing down on him. Somewhere in the silence, someone whispered loud enough for others to hear. "This is gonna be so bad." A few people laughed. Eli closed his eyes. He took a slow, deep breath. He pictured his grandmother's face. He heard her voice in his heart. "You have a gift. Don't ever let anyone take it from you." The music began. A slow, soft melody filled the auditorium. The old soul song, the one she used to hum to him, the one he had practiced 1,000 times in his little room by the window. Eli opened his mouth. And he sang. The first note came out smooth and clear. It floated through the air like a bird taking flight. The second note followed, then the third, each one stronger than the last. His voice rose and fell with the melody. It was rich and deep and full of emotion. It carried the pain of every lonely lunch, the sting of every cruel word, the ache of losing his grandmother, but it also carried something else. Hope, strength, a quiet, burning fire that had been waiting to come out. The auditorium went completely still. No one whispered, no one laughed, no one moved. Teachers leaned forward in their seats. Parents covered their mouths in shock. Students stared with wide eyes, unable to believe what they were hearing. The same boy who couldn't get through a sentence without stuttering was now filling the room with a voice that touched every soul. Eli didn't see any of it. His eyes were still closed. He was somewhere else now, somewhere safe, somewhere with his grandmother. He sang the final verse with everything he had. His voice climbed higher and higher, then softened to a gentle whisper as the song came to an end. The last note hung in the air for a moment, delicate and beautiful, before fading into silence. Eli opened his eyes. For one heartbeat there was nothing, just silence. Then the auditorium exploded. People leaped to their feet. The applause was deafening. It roared through the room like thunder. Students were cheering, teachers were clapping, parents were crying. Eli stood frozen at the microphone, unable to process what was happening. His eyes found his mother in the crowd. She was standing, tears streaming down her face, clapping harder than anyone. His father stood beside her, his hand over his heart, nodding slowly with pride. And somewhere in the front rows, the tall boy who had teased him for months sat in stunned silence. He wasn't laughing anymore. Nobody was laughing. For the first time in his life, Eli wasn't invisible. He wasn't a joke. He wasn't Mumbles. He was something more. And everyone in that room knew it. The applause seemed to last forever. Eli stood on that stage, his heart still racing, his eyes still wet, as the entire auditorium stayed on their feet. He didn't know what to do. He had imagined this moment 100 times, but nothing could have prepared him for how it actually felt. The sound of all those hands clapping, all those voices cheering, it washed over him like a wave he never wanted to end. Finally, the host came back on stage and gently guided him to the side. Eli walked off in a daze. His legs felt weak. His mind was spinning. Backstage, the other performers stared at him like they were seeing him for the first time. A few of them whispered to each other. One girl, a dancer who had barely looked at him before, walked up and said something he never expected. That was incredible. Eli didn't know how to respond. He just nodded and kept walking until he found a quiet corner where he could sit down and breathe. The rest of the show passed in a blur. More acts performed, more applause followed, but Eli barely heard any of it. He just sat there replaying what had just happened in his mind. He had done it. He had really done it. He had walked onto that stage, opened his mouth and sang, and people had listened. People had cared. When the show finally ended, the host returned to the stage to announce the winners. Eli's heart started pounding again. He hadn't even thought about winning. He had just wanted to survive. But now, standing backstage with all the other performers, he realized how much it would mean if his name was called. Third place went to a comedy duo. The crowd cheered. Second place went to the boy with the guitar. More cheers. And then the host paused. He smiled and looked down at the card in his hand. And the first place winner of this year's Spring Talent Show, who will also be performing at the Summer Festival, Eli. The crowd erupted again. Eli froze. For a second he thought he had heard wrong. But then the other performers started clapping around him, and someone pushed him gently toward the stage. He walked out into the spotlight one more time, his legs shaking, his eyes searching the crowd until he found his parents. His mother was sobbing. His father had tears running down his cheeks too, something Eli had never seen before. They were both clapping so hard their hands must have hurt. The host handed Eli a small trophy and shook his hand. The audience kept clapping. Eli looked out at all those faces, the same faces that had ignored him, mocked him, doubted him, and he felt something shift inside him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was just free. The days after the talent show were like living in a different world. At school, everything changed. People who had never spoken to him suddenly wanted to talk. Kids who had laughed at him now smiled and said hello in the hallways. Teachers looked at him with new respect. Even the principal stopped him one morning to shake his hand and tell him how proud the school was. But the biggest change came from the people who had hurt him the most. One afternoon, Eli was sitting on his usual bench behind the gym when a shadow fell over him. He looked up and saw the tall boy with the messy hair standing there. The same one who had led most of the teasing. The same one who had called him Mumbles more times than Eli could count. Eli tensed up, expecting another cruel joke, but the boy just stood there, looking uncomfortable. "Hey," he said quietly. Eli didn't respond, he just waited. The boy rubbed the back of his neck and looked at the ground. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything, the stuff I said, the way I treated you, it wasn't right." Eli stared at him for a long moment. Part of him wanted to say something sharp. Part of him wanted to make the boy feel the way he had felt all those months. But another part of him, a bigger part, just felt tired. Tired of holding onto the pain. "Okay," Eli said finally. The boy nodded awkwardly and walked away. It wasn't much. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was something, and for Eli it was enough. The months leading up to the summer festival passed quickly. Eli practiced every day. He worked with a music teacher from school who volunteered to help him prepare. He tried new songs, experimented with different styles, and pushed himself harder than ever before. The stutter still came and went in conversation, but when he sang, it never showed up. Music remained his safe place, his superpower. His parents saved up money to buy him a new outfit for the festival. Nothing fancy, just a nice shirt and pants. But to Eli, it felt like the most special thing he had ever owned. The night of the summer festival arrived on a warm evening in July. The park was packed. Thousands of people had come from all over the county. There were food stalls and game booths and colored lights strung between the trees. In the center of it all stood a large outdoor stage, lit up bright against the darkening sky. Eli stood backstage looking out at the crowd. It was 10 times bigger than the school auditorium, maybe more. His heart raced just like it had before. The fear was still there. It probably always would be. But now he knew something he hadn't known before. He could do this. When his name was announced, Eli walked out onto that stage. The crowd quieted down. He could see his parents in the front row, holding hands, their faces glowing with pride. Behind them stretched a sea of strangers, all waiting to hear what this young boy had to offer. Eli stepped up to the microphone. He closed his eyes. He thought of his grandmother. And then he sang. His voice carried across the park like a gentle wind. It rose above the trees and the lights and the noise of the world. It told the story of a boy who had been knocked down but never gave up. A boy who had been mocked but never stopped believing. A boy who found his voice when everyone told him he didn't have one. The crowd listened in silence. Some people swayed to the music. Others wiped tears from their eyes. Children stopped playing to watch. Strangers held their breath. When the final note faded into the summer night, the park exploded with applause. It was louder than anything Eli had ever heard. It shook the ground beneath his feet. It filled his chest with warmth and light and something that felt like belonging. He opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. The stars were just beginning to appear. And somewhere up there he knew his grandmother was watching, smiling, proud. He had kept his promise. He had shared his gift with the world. And he had done it not by changing who he was, but by finally letting people see the real him. The boy who had once been invisible. The boy who had been called Mumbles. The boy who sat alone on a bench and dreamed of something more. That boy was gone now. In his place stood someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned that the opinions of others don't define your worth, that the voices of doubt, both outside and inside, can be overcome, that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating others, but from finding the courage to be yourself. Eli smiled as the crowd continued to cheer. This wasn't the end of his story. It was only the beginning.